Surgery really is not done under the age of 18, except in severe cases.
Transition surgeries on minors, you know, that thing that never happens, is actually happening a lot, we just found out. I'm Brad Polumbo, and we're going to break it down on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, do remember to hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. So up first, we've got to talk about some genuinely shocking and alarming data that was just published by the Manhattan Institute. It shows that an alarming number, thousands upon thousands of double mastectomies were performed on minors, female minors, in the name of gender transition just in the last few years, which was quite the revelation given that over and over again, trans activists and gender ideologues have insisted that this kind of thing never happens. Let's go to that data now from Leo Sapir. A new analysis by the Manhattan Institute using a more up-to-date all-payer national insurance database from 2017 to 2023 found evidence of 5,288 to 6,294 gender-affirming double mastectomies for girls under age 18. This includes 50 to 179 girls who were 12.5 or younger at the time of their procedure. That's right, they literally have been doing this to 12-year-olds, surgically removing both of their breasts because they think they're transgender. Now, the author of this report goes on to explain that, if anything, these are conservative estimates, not in the political sense, but in the sense of underestimates, because the data for 2023 are incomplete, and this only captures surgeries that were paid for using insurance. But some likely did occur, but were paid for out of pocket. So we've got a minimum of 5,200 minors who were irreversibly butchered in these gender transition surgeries at an age below the age of adulthood, just since 2017. Yet this comes after years of gaslighting where activists and ideologues told us that this kind of thing almost never happens. Take a listen to the World Professional Association of Transgender Health's president, Marcy Bowers, in this 2023 CBS News interview.
There's a spectrum here, though, from identity all the way to surgery. So how common is it with surgery for someone under the age of 18 to be able to access it?
Surgery really is not done under the age of 18, except in severe cases, usually top surgery for transmasculine persons. And even that is rare. I think the estimates are something like 57 surgeries under the age of 18 were done for trans individuals.
I don't know whether she was lying or whether she was just incorrect. Either way, this data totally decimates the activist narrative. And Marcy Bowers was not the only one pushing this gaslighting. Activists and doctors who are activists have over and over again insisted that they don't do gender transition surgeries on minors, even though it's been a part of WPATH's standards of care for years. But people like me who pushed back on that have been accused of misinformation and fake news and transphobia and all that. There's one more aspect of this Manhattan Institute report that is particularly alarming for anybody with common sense. Even people who are completely supportive of the rights of transgender adults to live however will make them happy, as I am, and who totally believe that any of these surgeries should be available to any adult who wants them. But not only are they doing double mastectomies on young females who think they are actually men or have gender dysphoria or are transgender, they're also apparently doing breast nullification surgeries on confused girls who have been indoctrinated with this nonsensical notion that they are non-binary. Again, according to the Manhattan Institute, a growing trend in gender medicine is non-binary mastectomies, a procedure that some patients seek in order to appear neither male nor female. According to our data, a minimum of 1,873 such procedures, again, a conservative estimate, were performed on girls under the age of 18 in the US between 2017 and 2023. And it is very much a practice that is on the rise. The number of procedures grew from 70 in 2017 to 470 in 2023, an almost sevenfold rise. This is absolute madness. As I've explained many times, non-binary is essentially a cultural trend that is logically inconsistent and relies on crude gender stereotypes. It is not an actually recognized mental condition with any sort of long history or evidence base that could ever justify such drastic and irreversible changes and, frankly, mutilation to a minor's body. And that's the fundamental problem here, that we are talking about minors, not adults. We're talking about people with undeveloped, mushy brains who have not fully matured, who aren't even allowed to drive a car in some cases, if we're talking about the 12, 13, 14-year-olds, because society views them as too immature to even do that. But they can make irreversible decisions to cut off their healthy body parts? It's insane to think that this is something that should ever be allowed, let alone promoted in the name of LGBT acceptance in our community. A 12-year-old cannot consent to having their breasts removed. It's insanity. It's madness, and it simply needs to stop. I don't know whether that needs to come through a cultural change or through medical pressure and changes in the medical standards of care and within the industry, potentially motivated by lawsuits, or whether it will ultimately have to come through government regulation. But regardless, minors must be protected from this. If they are truly transgender, if they truly experience gender dysphoria, and by age 18 they want to have this done and they can afford to have it done and their doctor thinks it's in their best interest, then I would never be someone who wants to stand in their way. But society has an obligation to shield and protect children. And allowing their mutilation to go on in the name of tolerance and acceptance is a moral catastrophe. And it is a note for the LGBT community. If you attach, which they unfortunately have done, many of these activists, if you attach the acceptance of gay people and rights and dignity for transgender adults to something as radical as the surgical mutilation of minors far too young to consent, then guess what? Your movement is going to be rejected by most of the public, by commonsensical people. So the LGBT community must speak out against this, must stop wrapping this into its activism and acting like this is the kind of thing they need to defend or this is an integral part of the LGBT movement. Because if you insist on that, if you go down that path, you aren't going to somehow convince the public to be okay with the mutilation of minors. You're going to convince the public that actually accepting the LGBT community was a mistake. Guys, I just find it mortifying that as a gay person, anybody would think that this stuff, this surgical mutilation of 12-year-olds who are confused about their gender, has anything to do with me or my rights or is somehow something I support or am on board with. It is absolutely not, and I'm honestly just horrified by this whole development. But it is important to know about. Burying our heads in the sand is not a solution. So let me know what you think in the comments below about this story and about my arguments and the controversy over this. And now we've got to talk about Kamala Harris, who just went full Bernie Sanders. Never, ever go full Bernie Sanders, guys. Come on. News reports suggest that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to unveil a campaign proposal for federal price controls, caps on things like grocery prices that punish companies if they charge too much in the government's opinion. Here's how one of the Democratic Party's most prominent TikTok shills and a Kamala Harris simp, Harry Sisson, explained the proposal and talked about why it was such a good idea.
We have some breaking news. It's just been reported that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be introducing a policy to stop companies from price gouging and to lower the cost of groceries. This Friday, Harris is going to put forward a federal ban on corporate price gouging on groceries and impose stiff penalties in the food industry. The Harris campaign is labeling this bill as the first ever federal ban on price gouging on food and groceries, setting clear rules of the road to make clear that big corporations can't unfairly exploit consumers to run up excessive corporate profits on food and groceries. The campaign also singled out the highly consolidated meatpacking industry, noting how just 4 meat processors control the market and arguing, quote, the lack of competition gives these middlemen the power to drive down earnings for farmers while driving up prices for consumers. So Kamala Harris is putting forward policy to lower your bill at the grocery store and to prevent these companies in the future from artificially raising raising these prices. Seems pretty great, huh? Like, Donald Trump hasn't put out any policy like this. He wants these billionaires and these big corporations to just run up the prices and make a bigger profit, whereas Kamala Harris is looking out for you and your grocery bill. This is a great policy and a great move by the Harris campaign.
Oh, Harry. Don't quit your day job. Stick to TikTok, because economics, babe, is not your thing. There are so many problems with this radical left-wing idea that I genuinely don't know where to begin. But first and foremost, the fundamental premise behind it is false. Increases in grocery prices are not driven by corporate greed or price gouging. Nothing magically happened in 2021 where corporations got suddenly much greedier. I want to show you guys a graph of the price of eggs from 2014 to about 2023, and it shows it skyrocketing and coming back down and then going back up and then skyrocketing during a huge crisis in 2022, and they told us this was about greed. But that doesn't make any sense unless you think that they go through cycles where they rediscover greed and then forget greed and then rediscover greed and then forget greed. Companies are always charging whatever price will maximize their profits. That can't be what's behind the increase in grocery prices the last few years, because it hasn't changed. It's been the case for all of our lives. And according to an NYU survey that the economist Scott Lincecum pointed out on Twitter, the American grocery industry has just a 1.18% net profit margin last year. Even the industry giants like Kroger's net profit margin was 1.43%. Even in food processing, it's just a 6% profit margin, and in farming and agriculture, it's a 7.12% profit margin. That's well below the national average of a profit margin, guys. So price controls wouldn't fix this problem because they don't actually address the fundamental reason that prices are high in the first place, which has to do with supply chain disruptions from the pandemic lockdowns, interjections of massive amounts of stimulus money into the economy, and the printing of trillions of dollars out of thin air. But what price controls would do is reduce the supply of the food and of the groceries that people need to buy, because they would limit the ability of companies to actually make a profit on the product, given that the margins are already so slim. And so what you'd end up with is shortages. This isn't speculation, guys. We actually tried a series of price and wage controls in the 1970s in a hope to tamp down on inflation. And guess what happened? Massive shortages of things like gasoline that were price controlled, with lines and people waiting for hours and hours just to get to the gas station, and they were all out of gas. It is not a coincidence that economists almost universally, almost every single economist out there that you can find and you can survey, rejects price controls as a solution to high prices. Because it's like putting a band-aid on a bullet hole, except it actually isn't even like that, because it makes the problem worse in the long run. Now, none of this is to say that the current levels of grocery prices are just fine and dandy and Americans just need to suck it up and pick themselves up by their bootstraps. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is this Kamala idea is crazy and would make things worse, not better. Now, if we actually wanted to reduce grocery prices, one of the things we could do is lift the massive amounts of taxes that the US government currently imposes on the importation of groceries and food from overseas. In 2021, the USDA estimated that the elimination of US agricultural tariffs would increase consumer well-being by $3.5 billion a year. Just an economic way of saying how much consumers would save. So if Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or any of our other elected leaders actually want to help Americans out with lowering grocery prices, there is something they can do, but it's absolutely not returning to failed socialist price controls. That's just my take. If you guys disagree, I do want to hear from you, but it's going to be a tough sell convincing me to ever support this kind of idea. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug slugs.
If you're new here, do make sure you're subscribed and stick around. And regardless, do hit that like button as we go along to reward my suffering. And now we're going to take a look at some videos from Josh Sider, a radical trans activist that has many conservatives and Republicans up in arms. But I have a different take on Josh's content than many other people on the right. Here's some of Josh's most controversial content.
Hey everyone! So I want to talk today about the elephant in the room that women don't like talking about, but we all think about: having a bulge. Having a bulge doesn't magically make you a man. Having a bulge doesn't negate your womanhood. A lot of us women still have our bits and pieces, and that's okay. So I think we really need to start changing the language and discourse around this issue, and start normalizing it. Bye, everyone. Hey, everyone. So something I've noticed lately is guys look at me like I'm a piece of meat. And it's like, up here, guys, up here. And so I just had a date earlier this afternoon, and I sat there when the bill came, and finally I just said, the guy should pay first, and kind of pushed it towards him, and he said, well, in that case, you should pay. And I just thought, that is so rude. And I just don't understand what the issue is. I feel like everyone's trying to get something for free these days. I don't understand. I just want to go on a date and have the man be a gentleman and treat me right, treat me like a woman.
Now, if you go to the comments section on any of these videos, you will find angry commenter after angry commenter saying that this is insulting to women, this is a farce, this is a joke, this is ridiculous, you're a man, blah, blah, blah. And I can understand why people would have that reaction. But I fear that something's going over their head. I can't prove this, but it seems to me that this Josh person is doing a bit. That this is a long parody kind of self-satire, if you will. He's given the game away in some of the clips where it's just like so far over the top that you know it can't actually be real or true. And part of the reason I suspect that this is actually just a parody is that Josh has been an attention seeker for decades. He was formerly on The Bachelorette, and then he's desperately tried to stay relevant for years since then, including at one point by faking his own death. And Josh has a background as a Christian Republican. So if you ask me, this insane content is not the latest example of trans madness. It is an effective form of satire and parody that many people have fallen hook, line, and sinker for. But what do you guys think? Do you think this is parody, or do you think this is the real deal? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button, because even though I think it's not real, listening to that really did cost me some brain cells. And now, I'll read a few of your comments before we wrap up today's episode. One person writes, I learned in therapy your feelings are valid, however they're not facts. I don't know. Are they even always valid? Because sometimes, I mean, they're always true. They always exist. Like, your feelings are there. You should acknowledge their existence. You shouldn't just suppress them. But they're not always valid in the sense that people regularly feel things that are incorrect or are unfair, are unwarranted. And I do just question the premise that we've had as a society of late of accepting people's feelings and honoring people's feelings, when actually a lot of the human existence is about using our logic and our rationality to overcome and override our base instincts and desires. Another person says, I'm looking for a new senior IT role, and 2 agencies I use have told me off the record I'm too white and too male and they can't represent me. Hoping the whole market hasn't gone down this rabbit hole. Yikes, I am sorry to hear that, and that is really such a gross place to be at in any industry, and I do think that's becoming more common. And again, I just have to say, how does anyone think this is not going to fuel resentment and is actually going to promote racial harmony and coexistence? I don't understand how anyone could think that. Another person writes, denial proves your guilt? That rings a bell somehow. Something about witchcraft in Salem, maybe? If she sinks, she's innocent. If she floats, she's guilty. That really is the logic of the modern anti-racist movement, unfortunately. And yeah, it is culty. It is witch hunty. Another person writes, Brad, you must have a portfolio of real estate in your inheritance. Why else would you be so passionate about destroying rent control regulations? My dude, I don't have any sort of portfolio or inheritance to speak of. I don't support rent control policies because they actually hurt and make the problem worse in the long run, causing housing shortages and fueling poor quality of housing. But whatever you need to tell yourself, I guess. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and do hit that like button and do subscribe if you haven't yet. Do comment. I will read the comments later. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.